Hey friends, welcome in. My name is Chris. This is my garage. Welcome to Garage Thoughts. Yesterday, a man lost an election. Now, typically I wouldn't be covering something like this. Elections happen, leaders lose power. It's democracy working as intended. But this one was different because this wasn't just a man who was a prime minister of a small Central European country that most Americans can't find on a map. He was the architect, the OG, the guy who wrote the playbook that the global right had been following for about 15 years. That man is Viktor Orbán. Now, Viktor Orbán lost Hungary's parliamentary election yesterday in a landslide. And before we talk about what that means for the United States, for Russia, for the EU, and for the movement that he helped inspire, we need to understand how he built it in the first place. Because you cannot understand what's happening in American politics right now without understanding what happened in Budapest first. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background on who is Viktor Orbán. So Viktor Orbán was born in 1963 in a small town in rural Hungary. And here's the first thing that should give us a little bit of a pause, because he started as a liberal. No, seriously, as Hungary in the late 1980s was transitioning out of communism, Orbán was a young reformer. He gave a speech in 1989 calling for Soviet troops to leave Hungary. The public loved him. He was 26 years old and he was a rising star in Hungarian politics. He served his first term as prime minister from 1998 to 2002. He was relatively moderate. He joined NATO. Inflation kept under control. He was not a bad prime minister. But then he lost the election in 2002 and something happened to him. He spent the next 8 years waiting, and when he came back in 2010, he was a completely different political animal. Here's the number that matters. Fidesz, the far-right Christian nationalist party that he was a part of, won 53% of the vote in 2010. That amounts to about 68% of parliamentary seats due to how they calculate their elections. That is a constitutional supermajority, or enough votes to change the Constitution. And Orbán, to his credit, or not credit, terror, depending on your perspective, was remarkably honest about what he intended to do with it. So during his years in opposition, he had said that we have only to win once, and then properly. We have only to win once, but then properly. That's either the most candid thing a politician has ever said about their intentions with power, or the most chilling, or both, depending on your perspective. I'll let you decide which. Either way, he meant it, and in 2010, he got that chance. What followed in 2010 was not a dramatic overnight transformation. There were no tanks in the street. There was no martial law declared. There was not a moment where a news anchor could look into a camera and say, democracy's dead, we're fucked, we're done. There was none of that. What Orbán understood, and what makes his model so repeatable, is that you don't have to break democracy openly. You can hollow it out from the inside. You can keep the aesthetic of democracy, where elections still technically happen, the opposition party still technically opposes, and the free press is still technically free, while systematically removing all the guardrails that make the government actually function. He operated deliberately within the law while constantly rewriting the law. And I'm going to walk you through step by step how he did it. So step one is you control the media, but you do it legally. In 2010, Orbán had cut all state advertising funds to critical news outlets. He then leaned on private advertisers, essentially sending the message that continued support for unfriendly media coverage had consequences. He established a Fidesz-controlled media council with a sweeping oversight power. He didn't shut newsrooms down, he just made it economically damaging to criticize him. By the time his grip was fully consolidated, his control of the media landscape in Hungary was nearly absolute. He didn't do it through censorship, but rather through acquisition, as many oligarchs that were friendly to the Orbán regime decided to buy up media outlets in Hungary. And if that sounds familiar to you, don't look up Larry Ellison, CBS, or Barry Weiss, editor-in-chief of CBS. They have nothing to do with Donald Trump. Never mind. But he even told American conservatives exactly what he thought that they should learn from this. Standing on the CPAC stage in Budapest, and yes, I will talk about the fact that CPAC was held in Budapest, he told the crowd, "Have your own media. It is the only way to point out the insanity of the progressive left." Step 2, packing the courts. So after winning supermajority, Orban rewrote the Constitution and filled key institutions such as the Constitutional Court and the Prosecution Service with loyalists. He restructured the institutions themselves so that future governments could not easily undo what he had done. Step 3 is you redraw the electoral map. Using his parliamentary supermajority, Orban rewrote the electoral rules by gerrymandering districts, changing thresholds, restructuring how votes translated into seats. The opposition eventually figured out that the only way to have a shot to beat him was to run a single unified candidate in every district. So you give up your individual party identity just to compete on a slightly less uneven field. They did that in 2022, and Orban still won a supermajority. That's how well he constructed this system. Step 4 is you have to define the enemy, you have to keep it consistent, and you have to keep it external. So whether that be bureaucrats in the EU, migrants from Africa, academics, the globalist liberal elite, it doesn't matter precisely who fills a villain role. What matters is that there is always a villain. Always an external threat to Hungarian sovereignty, Hungarian culture, Hungarian identity. Does it sound familiar yet? And Orban is always the one standing between Hungary and that threat. This serves multiple functions. It will unify your base around fear, it will delegitimize your critics as agents of the enemy, and it gives every policy, no matter how authoritarian, a defensive framing. We're not restricting the free press, we're protecting Hungary from foreign influence. We're not packing courts, we're restoring proper Hungarian values to corrupted institutions. Again, this should sound all pretty familiar to you. Step 5 is you have to maintain the aesthetic. This is the part that makes it all work. Elections still happen in Hungary. The opposition still exists and they still campaign. International observers are invited. Orban's Hungary was never quite the level of a Myanmar or a Belarus. It was more subtle and more instructive. It was a democracy that functions just well enough to maintain legitimacy on a playing field tilted just far enough that losing becomes structurally improbable. One scholar once called it an electoral autocracy, democracy in form, autocratic in function. And it held for 15 years. What did it feel like inside of Hungary? Numbers are useful. Here are some numbers. Freedom House found that under Orban, Hungary's freedom score dropped by 20 points on a 100-point scale. The Bertelsmann Transformation Index rated Hungary's political transformation at 9.35 out of 10 in 2010. By 24, that number had fallen to 6.3, which redefined it as a defective democracy. Between 2010 and 2023, Hungary fell from 39th to 61st in economic freedom. By 2025, Hungary had ranked last in EU household wealth, inflation surged, economic stagnation set in. Does that sound familiar to you? And I want you to picture this image because this became a symbol for what ordinary Hungarians were watching happen. So while they're ranking dead last in the EU for household income, there were video footage circulated of country estates built by Orban's inner circle, his oligarchs, his friends, sprawling properties. One of them had fucking zebras on it. Actual fucking zebras roaming the ground. You can't fucking write that. You can't write that. That became a rallying point for the common man in Hungary. And here's the part that I think matters most. And it gets lost in a macro analysis. And that is that none of this happened all at once. Every single step taken individually had a justification, a framing, could be rationalized and could be seen as survivable on its own. The people who saw it clearly and said, well, this is how democracy dies, are called alarmists, they're called hysterical, and it's called opposition propaganda. Does this sound familiar to you? And by the time the cumulative weight of 15 years of incremental erosion had become undeniable, the institutions who could have stopped it were already gone. Section 4 is where the blueprint goes global. Now here's where it gets interesting for the rest of us. Orban did not keep the model to himself. He became explicitly an international export. Steve Bannon, who's a former White House chief strategist and one of the architects of Trump's 2016 campaign, called Orban Trump before there was Trump. Tucker Carlson, the fucking rich Nepo baby turned trusted journalist for some reason, flew to Budapest to spend time with Orban, broadcast from Hungary, and described him approvingly to millions of his American viewers. Now, the Conservative Political Action Committee, or conference rather, CPAC, held its conference in Budapest not just once, but 4 fucking years in a row. Let's just sit with that for a second. The people who brought you America First held their flagship conference of American conservatism in the capital of a country that all major democracy watchdogs had already reclassified as an autocracy for 4 straight years. And Orban was the keynote attraction. It wasn't just atmosphere. Research that compares Hungarian state-aligned media and American MAGA media found the two systems producing parallel narratives. The same themes, same enemies, anti-liberal, anti-multicultural, anti-globalist. The pipeline is not just ideological, it was also institutional. Hungarian American conservative think tanks built formal relationships. Veterans of Trump's first administration studied what Orban had built and began asking how to apply it to the American context. One phrase that kept emerging in those conversations was the Budapest playbook. And this is the part where I want to be careful, because my job here is not to tell you what to think about American politics, but what I will tell you is this. The parallels are structural, they're documented, and they're explicit. The people involved here have said so themselves openly from public stages. Media capture through acquisition and financial pressure, court restructuring, electoral system manipulation, defining an external enemy, maintaining democratic aesthetics while altering democratic substance. Whether you see those as a cautionary pattern or legitimate governance strategies probably says something about where you sit politically, but you should know that they exist. You should know where they came from, and you should know that the man who pioneered them just lost an election. Now, I'm going to give you some parallels between Orban and Trumpism. And I have to be specific about where the parallels are and aren't, because intellectual honesty matters to me. I know that's crazy in this day and age, but I'm just holding on to it. The structural echoes are real. Veterans of Trump's first administration have publicly and explicitly said that they studied Orban's model as a blueprint for a more effective second term. Project 2025, whatever you think of it politically, contains frameworks that echo the Hungarian consolidation playbook in meaningful ways. The differences matter too. The United States is a federal system, power distributed across 50 states in a way that kind of makes top-down consolidation, Orban achieved, structurally harder. American courts have more independence, more layers. The American free press, while under enormous pressure, still have more institutional breadth than Hungary's media landscape did in 2010. American civil society is also larger, more resourced, and more combative than Hungary's was. The opposition to democratic backsliding, whether you think backsliding is or is not happening, is more organized. Speed matters too. Orban had 15 years. The media environment that exists today means both consolidation could happen faster, but also that resistance can organize faster too. Here's what I think Hungary actually tells us structurally. It tells us which institutions matter most. Independent courts, a free and economically viable press, electoral systems that resist manipulation, oversight mechanisms with actual teeth. Whether those things are under pressure in any democracy, under any government, Hungary is a case study that allows us to show what sustained pressure on those institutions applied incrementally over time can produce. So, yesterday, Viktor Orban, The man who said that we only have to win once, but then properly, who built a system specifically designed to make losing structurally improbable, lost badly. Petr Mizar, a former Orban loyalist who broke with the movement 2 years ago over corruption, built the TISA party essentially from scratch. And the TISA party is a center-right party. He won 138 seats in a 199-seat parliament. Orban's Fidesz won about 55. Turnout was 80%, which is the highest since the fall of the Soviet Union. The people who lived under the original blueprint rejected it. Now, J.D. Vance had flown to Hungary the day before an election to campaign for Viktor Orban. Yes, the vice president of the United States is actively campaigning for a foreign leader, and declared that the United States wanted to help him win. He lost by 16%. We really have to study what J.D. Vance does, because we sent him to see the Pope. Pope died. We sent him to the Iran negotiations. Them shits broke down. He went to campaign for Orban. Orban got fucking walloped. Mizar stood, and I don't know how to pronounce the name entirely, so if I'm mispronouncing it, please give me grace on that. Stood in front of tens of thousands of supporters along the Danube River and said, "Tonight, truth prevailed over lies." Sure. Here's what I want to leave you with. The blueprint that the global right has been studying for 15 years just got stress tested, and they said no, with record turnout. This doesn't mean the blueprint doesn't work elsewhere, but it does mean something that I think gets lost in all of the doom and gloom analysis of democratic backsliding, which I fucking love. These things are not inevitable. They're not irreversible, and people inside the system, when given a genuine alternative and a reason to believe that it is possible, will show up. Nearly 80% of Hungarian voters showed up yesterday. I am a student of history, and history is not a story of inevitable outcomes. It is a story of choices made by people in specific moments under specific conditions. Yesterday, Hungary made a choice, and they said no to right-wing authoritarianism. Whether that carries throughout the global landscape remains to be seen, but I do think it is the first domino to fall in a lot of backlash to these faux right-wing populist turn autocratic governments. But I'm just a guy in his garage. I'm Chris, and if you want context, you want nuance, and you want the occasional joke about zebras on a billionaire's estate, subscribe. I'll see you next time, and thank you so much for showing up. As always, peace and love.